Hello, everybody. It's Gyuri Kadyrov, co-founder and CEO of Imagga, and I'm happy to be part of ImageCon and present you the topic for today, which is how to use AI for efficient visual content moderation at scale. I will start with a bit of a background for Imagga. It's one of the very first image recognition API companies offering a portfolio of various technologies for automated image annotation, classification, facial recognition, and in particular, content moderation. We've served various types of customers. Practically any company that needs to manage visual content and apply some kind of automation on it is potentially a customer of ours. We have more than 200 such business customers and more than 24,000 developers using our technology in more than 50 countries across the world. We've been also identified as one of the key innovators in the space. IDC recognized us as one of the top 3 most innovative companies in the world for 2016 when we started our specific machine learning training product offering. We've also been processing more than 15 billion photos for various types of customers. And we've trained one of the biggest image classifiers in the world for PlantSnap, a leading image recognition application. And this app can recognize more than 100,000 different plant species. So what's the motivation for us as a company to go in the space of content moderation? There's a huge demand among different organizations, no matter how big or small, if they have any kind of user-generated content, to be able to sort it out in terms of is it appropriate or not, whatever it might mean. And it might mean more specific things or more trivial things, but the speed with which content is created is exponential right now. And the speed with which content is moderated is very slow. So we believe that the combination between image recognition AI and eventually human labor can solve the problem of content moderation at much bigger scale than it currently is. And it starts to be bigger and bigger problem also because of regulations. And as I said, because of the explosive growth and the ease of creating content, for example, on your mobile phone. To take a bit more particular look on several examples, if you have user-generated content uploaded on your website, for example, it would pretty severely ruin the brand reputation if certain type of inappropriate content is posted there and it stays for, let's say, more than a few seconds or minutes. This also disturbs potentially vulnerable groups like children or people with some specific conditions or history or track record where vulnerable content or inappropriate content can make them even more vulnerable and create different type of psychological problems, for example. Last but not least, the presence of inappropriate content creates potentially compliance and regulation issues because in many geographies, it's not allowed some specific type of content to be published and to be stored. And it's the responsibility of the actual host of this content to make sure it's removed and it's not exposed for more than a short period of time. Here's a particular tangible example. The Tumblr application itself was temporarily shut down from the Apple App Store because of some of the content that's inside, user-generated and related to some kind of like inappropriate content. I wouldn't cite, you can check out. But basically, it's a very strong example about how you cannot just leave your content to your users and pray that everything will be okay with it. Of course, the idea is not to instill some kind of fear or something, but it's a really, really significant aspect of building the trust and safety of your brand as of today. So what's the problem with manual annotation of content and in particular manual content moderation? It's too expensive and delayed in time, and especially with the rise of more and more real-time or near real-time content, live streaming and so on, it's not humanly possible for people to just go and check content. And this needs to be automated or at least significantly reduced in terms of human effort. Also, it's mentally and emotionally exhausting to handle huge loads of inappropriate content. Even if the human labor was very cheap, it's morally inappropriate to engage people in a lot of exposure of inappropriate content just because this literally alternates their reality, because they're looking at so much trash or inappropriate or bad content on a daily basis. As I briefly mentioned, also we have an exponential growth in the size of contents that's generated, but to train a team or to hire people to moderate this content is actually something that goes at a very slow linear pace. And this also relates even deeper to the fact of changing requirements or adding new types of appropriate or inappropriate content specifications. And if you need to train a huge mass of people to start moderating a new way, typically this is very error prone, and it creates a lot of confusion. And it's definitely not an overnight process. While if we talk about technology, this is something that can be switched very, very easily. People, to a certain extent, are subjective. Of course, AI is also potentially subjective and it lacks context. But still, in general terms, if we talk about automation based on image recognition, at least we have some consistent way. Even when the technology is missing something, it's in a controllable way. Last but not least, the exposure of potentially personal content to people has a lot of privacy issues. Of course, part of this can be addressed, and we'll see how we've addressed this in our hybrid solution. So our mission is to help all sides of organizations to have better content moderation workflow, including the big companies who needs to manage a lot of visual content, and maybe they also already have some kind of content moderation solution, but ours, which is kind of extended and very well integrated with human feedback loop, can extend the capacity and the effectiveness of their own internal process for content moderation. On the mid-sized company level, we want to empower mid-sized companies who don't have the resources to build their own internal solutions, like the big ones, for example, and use our technology for the purpose of providing the same level of trust and safety that a big social media company, for example, can offer to their customers, using our technology out of the box. As I said, because most likely they won't be able to do the research and development work, or if they do, this is going to be a huge time to market based on our own experience as well. So having the same technological abilities that potentially big companies have as well. Last but not least, we envision that this kind of solution can be utilized even by the very small user-generated content-enabled platforms, where even uploading a profile picture or a comment with potentially including visual material into it can benefit from this solution. And we can think of it something like a SSL certificate for visual content. So what's the overall concept behind AI? On the very high level, we have the incoming visual content. We apply different types and combinations of technologies that we already have in our portfolio, and sometimes we offer them as a separate products. But in this case, they're specifically trained for the purpose of content moderation, to perform various types of scene classification, object detection, facial recognition, potentially landmark detection, and optical character recognition for detection of inappropriate text that's baked into the image itself. And then this goes to the actual moderation platform or loopback or callback, where this content can do whatever is appropriate in terms of business logic for our customer. I'll explain this in a bit more detail shortly, but before that, I want to mention about the financial aspects of it. Just 1 million of photos, which is a significantly smaller amount than what most popular social media companies are managing on a daily basis. Just 1 million photos to be moderated, if we we're about to use just human labor. This would cost more than $90,000, and the accumulated man days will be actually 3 full-time man years just for 1 million photos. In a comparison, if you use a fully automated solution, this can cost you less than $500, or actually exactly in our case $500, and is a process that can finish very fast. Here, just as an example, I've mentioned 5 minutes, but it can be actually much faster depending on how your internal processes and callbacks and everything is organized. In the hybrid case, still this can be greatly reduced, especially this previous component of the human labor can be greatly reduced because just a very small fraction of the initial content is sent for manual human moderation. This happens by the definition of the project administrator, so the one who is defining what ranges of recognition should go where, and some of them might be accepted, rejected, or in the gray zone. And if they're in the gray zone, they can go for manual moderation. Then a combination of this manual moderation, if we take the same price values typically for human labor, and the combination with the API itself, can reduce the budget to a little bit more than $3,000 for the same amount of images. Of course, this human moderation is an optional component of it. So something that we wanted to do is to be as broad as possible in the scope of what our content moderation AI technology can detect. And here you can see a list of the major topics and types of inappropriate content that we can detect. As you can see, there are things that are more trivial and accepted typically as inappropriate or not safe for work content. But we have a few more subtle, like abuse of substances, obscene gestures, graffiti of unkind nature, brawls, mice fights, and so on. And a bit, of course, a bit more subjective things like propaganda detection, terrorism detection in terms of imagery. Here's an example of just like visualize how just the API itself might work. So you have the API and different images that are sent over, and the API would return a certain level of confidence of is this image safe or unsafe of what type. However, we've built, as I briefly mentioned before, a full stack content moderation solution. So you have the API itself, and you may decide to use just the API. But we also have this web and currently working on a mobile moderation UI, where you can include or involve human labor into the actual process of moderation when this is needed. We also offer potentially these data teams that are going through this gray zone content, and this might be or might not be your internal team, it might be our team as well. We are also actively working on making the platform more and more accessible via the development of various types of plugins that can be used directly out of the box, even without the need of the very lightweight API integration. So here again, a bit more detailed explanation about how the whole solution works. So we have on the left-hand side, the user-generated incoming to the actual customer platform. And before it's moderated and goes to the actual public status, to say so, it goes through our content moderation platform. The entry, the gateway to it is the API itself. But the API actually talks and is aware with the dashboard that the admin of the content moderation installation project, to say so, have the control to define various types of attributes. And I'll explain a bit more about them in the next slide. Also, as part of this platform is the actual content moderation UI, where moderators can log in and start moderating the content in the gray zone, if any. So this team, as I mentioned, can be also provided on our side. And last but not least, based on this human feedback, our system can learn and can eventually decrease the need for future involvement of more and more moderators, even if the content is growing exponentially. So here is a bit more detailed about the moderation UI workflow itself, so the thing that the moderators are actually using. Again, we have the content and the platform of the customer that is making requests to the actual API. And if these things need to go, and these items need to go for manual moderation, they go to the so-called moderation UI. So as part of it, and as part of its dashboard, can be defined various types of entities and various types of logical entities. So for example, we have projects, which is, let's say a customer may have different internet properties and they might have different logic of how content should be moderated there. But for each project, they can define the categories, so the types of, or the reasons for rejections, or the types of inappropriate content. What are the typical priorities in this project? What is the SLA, the time for reaction? How many, in batches, how many items should be sent to a single moderator so he can be more concentrated and not jumping around on various types of content? And the actual moderator roles themselves. The categories or the reasons for rejection have their textual description, have again SLA that can override. So if something is suspected to be in a very severe inappropriate category, it might go further in process. And they have their definition of guidelines, what is acceptable and unacceptable type of content. And last but not least, they have this confidence range. So let's say we're talking about adult content. If the technology, the automated API technology suggests that this content is 40% adult or pornography, then it might go for rejection. If it says it's 5% adult, it might be accepted. But what happens with, let's say, the things that are between 35 and 40% of confidence for being adult or pornography type of content? This, for example, is a good example when something that is in the gray zone is sent over for manual moderation, and this actually is part and is a customizable part of the definition of these so-called categories or reasons for moderation of content. There are different types of rules defined for the items and that can be assigned to the items that go for moderation. So we have the type, and one particular example of this is language. For example, if you talk about moderating textual content or visual content with some text based into it, what is the language of the item? If this is known in advance, this can be fed into our system. And these rules might be assigned to both the items that go for moderation and the moderator. So for example, if a moderator can speak French and Spanish, the items that are reported to be in French and Spanish might go to them and might not go to anybody else if they don't have the French or Spanish background, for example. For the moderators themselves, we have, of course, their credentials, their skills that are defined by those rules that I just mentioned about, and the batches of items that they need to moderate. And last but not least, the items themselves can be either visual or textual or a combination of both. They have assigned rules to them, and they might also have specific SLA or certain flags. For example, something has escalated for immediate review. Yeah, and it's in the hands of our customers to also define their custom attributes. So this is a metadata that flies with the item. So when they feed the item and then somebody needs to visualize it in the moderation UI workflow, these specific attributes are visible there, so they can provide additional context or even sometimes actions, because we've allowed some of the attributes to be clickable links. So very powerful aspect of our moderation platform is the API. And I'm not talking about the analysis API or the AI API. It's an API for managing the moderation process itself. So it can allow our customers to feed items eventually with custom attributes, as I just mentioned in my previous slide. It can also define what type of callbacks to be sent over back to the customers depending on actions of the moderators. It can give you access, programmatic access to the status of items. It can even give you the chance, if for some reason you have your own specific UI requirements, to be able to create your own alternative UI for the whole platform, where still this logic for correlation between items, rules, moderators, and so on is absolutely doable. In general, it might be used as a complete dashboard alternative because this API itself allows you to create projects, categories, rules, and moderators. And last but not least, it also enables you to feed items using some kind of data exports from other tools and reading them and potentially calling the API to feed items instead of using some other measures for import and export. The platform is designed to be GDPR compliant, and this includes several aspects. One of them is the potentially optional anonymization of faces and car plates. So if we find an identifiable human face in the image, we may blur it if this is defined by the admin. So if you want to guarantee to your users that their personal photos and data won't be disclosed, this is very easily doable using this option. Also, there's a full logging access and access of the actions performed, which is a key GDPR criteria. So you know who have access to what type of content at what period of time. Also, the 3-month expiry password rule is valid, and you have the option for full deletion of content, so no backups when this is required. And of course, as a context, Imagga itself is a GDPR compliant company, so everything that's related to managing data on our side is also compliant. What are the major use cases of this technology? Maybe some of you, if you're already into this space, you already have them in mind. But I'll still would like to go through this. Because sometimes you discover something that might not be directly related to your business right now, but might be a good opportunity to optimize the process or to increase the trust and safety into your brand. Maybe very naturally, one of the first major use cases is for user-generated content platform and social media that I mentioned multiple times about already. And you can think of it like a SSL certificate for the quality of the visual and textual content that grows through these platforms. Partially overlapping is the case of media sharing, streaming, and personal content apps. So let's say services that has a lot of broadcasting or video chatting kind of functionality where you want to make sure that without having to match the number of active connections or active live streamings to a number of manual human moderators who can monitor them. You want to make sure that still this content is safe, because currently, for example, a huge mass of our customers are coming with the requirement to monitor live broadcasts. This is a huge use case because, as I said also in the very beginning, you cannot have as many moderators as many live streams are out there. And also because if you allow such content and if you're not restricting your users from posting it or sharing it or broadcasting it, this might create compliance issues for your application itself. Digital dating, social messaging, discussion platforms, gaming chats, people, places where people have one-to-one interaction are also very appropriate for this type of moderation, because again, this is something, especially this is something where people cannot feel safe that another person is inspecting this content, and at the same time they are very vulnerable to exposure of inappropriate content by somebody who is sending them over something. Another related case is the educational infrastructure, mostly in terms of software and services that are used there and allow people to exchange information or to browse certain websites or to do certain type of activities that might include the exposure to inappropriate content. Religious societies that are more vulnerable or more affected by inappropriate type of content. And on a side note, but not insignificant one, is law enforcement for the detection of potential crimes or actual crimes based on the visual content that has been posted. So how the pricing structure of this works, it can be used just in the form of API, and here you can see the pricing. Practically speaking, it's $500 per 1 million images, and we have certain volume discounts for bigger volumes. There's also optional subscription for the platform UI. If the customer wants to actually use a dashboard and include moderation team, this is on a software as a service monthly subscription basis, based on the number of seats or the number of moderators. Here's given a number, a very typical one of, let's say, 50 seats that costs $4,000 on a monthly basis. And also optionally, we offer the ability to include our own data moderation team, where the pricing obviously is much higher compared to the API. It's 5 cents per moderated image. So there are a lot of solutions out there that do some kind of content filtering, to say so, or detection of inappropriate content. But we believe that we have the best mix of detecting various types of content, so not being focused, let's say, just on adult pornography and nudity and potentially firearms, but detecting a lot of various types of content that are not supposed to be exposed to a huge group of people. As I said earlier, this includes various types of violence, various types of politically incorrect content or historically offensive type of content. Also, we have the option for customization of these specific types of content that might not be appropriate in certain geographies, for example. The content moderation UI is our second and very huge advantage because it's a very flexible solution that enables you to define various types of rules and utilize the combination between human and artificial intelligence in a continuous feedback loop. And last, but still very important, especially in the context of content moderation, is the various deployment options. So in addition to the cloud, which is the default option, and the edge, which is working just in a small number of cases, or not small, but not in the cases where you would need human moderation. It might work directly solely on edge. But very importantly, the on-premise option, because the on-premise requires, the on-premise itself is very appropriate when you need to use some kind of privacy regulations that don't allow the moving of this content out of your data center, for example. So this on-premise option is something that we see a lot of enterprise customers being interested in. Some of the unique features that contribute actually to the advantages of the platform is that it's very flexible and customizable. We haven't set anything in stone, just those few types of logical entities like the projects, the items, the rules, the moderators, and the categories or the reasons for rejection. And this all can be customized and fully custom defined. Of course, we are coming with a predefined set of rules or categories, with reasons for rejection or categories, but this can be modified and extended even in real time via feedback loop. This is all accessible through our API, so you have full control over the creation of all those. And each item, as I said earlier, can also support practically unlimited number of specific attributes that might go from the actual customer platform to the content moderation platform UI, if this needs to be distributed and visualized to the actual manual moderator. All these powerful functionalities are accessible via dashboard that gives the admin the ability to define various rules and to get statistics, something very important as well, to have statistics about how the content is being monitored in terms of time, in terms of approved versus rejected, both in the case when it's fully automated by API and or in the case where it's involving human labor. Also, all these attributes that are coming with the items are potentially callbacks and can be interactive attributes. So let's say you can include, even without writing any specific code other than those that we'll handle on your site, but you can include action buttons as part of the metadata that you're presenting to the moderator, so they can click, for example, on something that will lead them back to your website or call a callback on your website. That's it. And I do hope that this presentation will be useful for you to give you an overview of what's currently achievable and the benefits of it in terms of using AI for the purpose of content moderation. Thank you.